What the hell are you doing? I was at this party with my stepmom, who has a bad leg. She asked me to come along. I stepped away for a moment, and when I got back, some guy had dumped champagne all over her. Humph, you are in the way, sitting around at my standing party. I do not care if you have a bad leg. Turns out this fellow is the CEO of the company throwing the party. If I remember right, his name was Mr. Johnson. Do you not think that is out of line for a company CEO? Watch your mouth, kid. Well, I guess common folk like you are never going to taste Dom Perignon. You ought to be grateful I poured it on her head. As I glared at the CEO laughing his head off, he glared right back. What is with that look? You are just some subcontractor's brat. Subcontractors are a dime a dozen. Get lost. Then he even started shooing us away like we were flies. That is when I lost it. I made up my mind right then and there. I was not going to let Mr. Johnson get away with dumping champagne on my stepmom and talking trash. I am going to fire you first. Huh? After this, he's going to get a one-way ticket to hell. My name is Jack Thompson. I am 35 and single. I keep busy with work every day, but I always make sure my Friday nights are free. That is when I have dinner with my mom. Sorry to keep you waiting, Mom. Oh no, Jack. I just got here myself. Mom is smiling up at me in front of the restaurant. My mom, Sarah, turned 55 this year. Her face has more wrinkles now, but her eyes are still kind as ever, and she has got a cane in her right hand. Mom has had a bad leg since birth, so she cannot get around without that cane. Truth is, this woman and I are not actually related by blood. Let me start from the beginning. As far as I can remember, I was living with just my dad. I was going to daycare, and most kids got picked up by their moms. But for me, it was always my dad in his work suit, coming late. My friends would talk about their moms like it was the most natural thing. But I could not even imagine what having a mom was like. Hey Dad, how come I do not have a mom? When I asked him that, he got this pained look on his face and said, I am sorry, Jack. I am so sorry. Seeing Dad's face like that, I felt something and could not bring myself to ask any more. This is what I heard from my grandma when I was about 5. My real mom had an affair right after I was born, and she ran off with some guy, leaving me and Dad behind. I had figured it was something like that, but knowing for sure that my own mother had abandoned me left a scar on my heart. It was a little while after I started elementary school. Dad came to me, acting all nervous, and said, Jack, there is someone I want you to meet. Someone you want me to meet? And that is when he introduced me to this lady named Sarah. At the time, I think Dad was about 35, same as I am now, and Sarah was 27. Jack, I am thinking of marrying Sarah here. She's going to be your new mom. Is that okay with you? I was shocked. It is not surprising that I was taken aback. Suddenly having a mother after never knowing one was a lot to take in. Plus, there was something on my mind. Miss, why are you using a cane? I realize now it was rude to blurt that out first thing, but I was just a little kid back then. Nice to meet you, Jack. I was born with a bad leg. I can walk with the cane though. Do you dislike a mom like me? Sarah looked a bit unsure as she said this, but I shook my head. No way. I am happy to have a mom. That is great. If you are okay with it, shall we shake hands to say hello? So Sarah and I shook hands. I remember her hand was soft and warm. After that, Dad took me to meet Sarah several times. Each time, she would bring me homemade snacks or help me with my homework. I gradually warmed up to Sarah and started talking to her naturally. 6 months after Sarah and I first met, she and Dad got married. It was Dad's second marriage, but Sarah's first. They had been working at the same company, they told me. Sarah did not want a big wedding, so they just took some photos to commemorate it. Sarah in her wedding dress was so beautiful. Even young me was in awe. The family photo of the 3 of us from that day is still on my desk. Dad smiling, Sarah looking shy, and me in my school uniform looking a bit nervous. It is a picture of a happy family. After that, The three of us lived together. For a while after Sarah moved in, I still called her Sarah. I was still a bit shy and hesitant to call her Mom. Neither Sarah nor Dad scolded me for it. Sarah kept working while also taking care of the house as a wife. She was especially good at cooking. For me, who had been eating Dad's limited repertoire of dishes, it was like a dream come true. "Sarah, can I have more hamburger steak?" "Oh my, I am so glad you are eating a lot." Sarah always smiled at me kindly, and I gradually opened my heart to her. I even started telling her about things that happened at school. A little over a year after Sarah came to live with us, we had a class at school where we drew pictures as Mother's Day presents. I worked hard to draw Sarah's smiling face. I even wrote "Thank you, Mom," but I needed a bit of courage to give it to her. Would Sarah be happy with it? I put the drawing in my backpack and came home, fidgeting around. Sarah noticed and asked, "Jack, what is wrong? Is there something you want to tell me?" "I'm here, Mom. Thank you for everything." When I handed the drawing to Sarah, her eyes went wide. Then big tears started rolling down her cheeks. "You called me Mom? I am so happy." "Thank you." And Sarah hugged me tightly, overcome with emotion. "Can I call you Mom from now on?" "Of course." "I'd love it." Dad watched us with a happy look on his face. Having a dad and a mom, I was happy with that life. Dad still doted on me as always, and Sarah, no, Mom, treated me with warmth and scolded me properly when needed. I was happiest just having that normal family life. However, that modest happiness did not last long. One day, Dad suddenly collapsed at work. Mom, who worked at the same company, rode in the ambulance with him to the hospital. But Dad had suffered heart failure, and by the time they reached the hospital, it was too late. Dad. When I was brought to the hospital, I saw Dad with a white cloth over his face. His hand was cold, and he wouldn't wake up no matter how much I called out to him. Mom was crying behind me. Just like that, Dad was suddenly gone. I was in a daze, having lost the father who had protected me since birth and raised me alone for several years. Even during Dad's funeral, it didn't feel real. I only remember Mom holding my hand the whole time during the service. After the funeral, it was just me, Mom, and Dad's mother who lived separately. Grandma liked Mom. I didn't understand at the time, but they seemed to get along well. That boy, leaving us so early. But I think he must have been happy living with you, Sarah, for those last few years. At those words, Sarah cried again. Now, about what happens next. I'll take Jack in. Sarah, you're not his real mother, and you're still young. You can find happiness again. So don't feel you have to force yourself. I looked down. It's true, Mom isn't my real mother. But if I lived with Grandma, I'd have to change schools, and more importantly, Mom and I would become strangers and be separated. The thought made my heart scream. But Mom, as if sensing this, squeezed my hand tightly. No, Mother. I will raise Jack. Both Grandma and I looked at Mom in surprise. But Sarah, you have a bad leg, and you might struggle financially from now on. He might become a burden. Are you sure you still want to take him in? Yes. The day Jack first called me Mom, I decided. I would always protect him, be his mother for life. Sure, it might be hard, but it's for my dear son. I swear I'll pour all my love into him, including his father's share, and raise him to be a fine young man. So please, Mother, let me take care of Jack. Mom's words were filled with firm resolve. Grandma said through tears, Sarah, are you really sure? Will you think of Jack as your own son? Of course. Jack is my one and only son. I looked up at Mom's face. Mom suddenly looked at me and said, Jack, is that okay with you? Will you keep living with Mom? I nodded while crying. Mom saying she wanted to live with me, calling me her real son. It warmed my heart that had frozen after losing Dad. Yeah, I want to stay with you, Mom. I'll help out a lot. I'll be a good boy, so please let me stay with you. Jack, Seeing us crying together, Grandma said to Mom, "If anything happens, just let me know. I'll help however I can. Sarah, please take good care of Jack." And so, even after losing Dad, I continued to live with Mom. Mom must have been shocked and lonely after losing Dad too. But she never showed her tears in front of me. She tried to keep the same warm smile as before. Mom decided to raise me while working as an accountant at the company. She'd wake up early every morning to make my breakfast, see me off, then go to work. I'd get home earlier than her, so I tried my best to help with housework to lighten her load. At those times, Mom would happily say, "Oh my, Jack, you did the laundry? I'm so happy, thank you." I worked hard to help out just to see Mom smile like that. I grew up that way and became a middle school student. During adolescence, some might rebel against their parents, but I didn't have a rebellious phase. I never forgot my gratitude towards Mom, so I didn't feel like rebelling. Mom was a full-time employee, but life wasn't easy for us. We'd go grocery shopping together and grow vegetables and planters to make our daily meals work. "Mom, thanks for another delicious meal. This beef stew is the best." "Thank you, Jack. It's because you say things like that I can always do my best." When exam season came, I decided to enroll in the top private high school in the prefecture as a scholarship student. Mom was overjoyed and said, "You're my pride and joy." After starting high school, I got permission to start a part-time job. It was to make life a little easier for Mom and me. "Jack, I appreciate you working part-time, but a student's main job is studying. I'd really like you to focus on your studies without worrying about me." Mom looked worried when she said that, so I made sure not to let my grades slip. I managed to keep the top rank in my grade for all 3 years. It was tough, of course, but thinking it was easier than what Mom went through made me able to keep at it. Then came my senior year of high school. "Jack, you haven't talked to me about your plans. What do you intend to do after graduating high school?" When Mom asked me one day, I answered, "Oh, that. I was thinking of becoming a civil servant after graduation. I'll probably pass the exam, so don't worry." "What, Jack? Did you want to be a civil servant? I've never heard that before." "Well, not exactly. I want to be independent soon. A civil servant job has stable income, and I could help make things easier for you, right?" When I said that, Mom's eyes went wide. Then she spoke in a stern voice. "Jack, sit down right there." "Huh? Oh. Okay." My usually gentle mom was clearly angry at that moment. I looked up at her face nervously. "Jack, a child shouldn't hold back for their parents' sake. Your homeroom teacher told me you're an excellent student who could go to any university. Don't you really want to go to college?" I was at a loss for words. The truth is, I did want to go to university and study, but that would mean living alone and tuition costs. But university costs too much, and I was thinking of you, Mom. I can tell you're thinking of me. But have you forgotten that I, as your mother, think of you just as much? When I fell silent, Mom brought out an estate inventory and placed it in front of me. "This is your father's inheritance. I've kept it untouched until now." "What?" The estate inventory showed savings of tens of thousands of dollars. "I've been saving up to send you to university. With this inheritance and my savings, you should be able to go. So please, go to the university you want. That's what your mom and your dad in heaven wish for." Mom said this with tears in her eyes. "Mom, is this really okay?" "Of course it is. Jack, please set your mother's mind at ease." "Mom, thank you. Really, thank you. I'll never forget this kindness." Then Mom laughed and said, "Kindness? Don't be so dramatic." After that, I studied hard and got accepted into one of the top universities in the country. As I became a university student and prepared to live alone away from home, on moving day, Mom looked at me with deep emotion and said, "Jack, you've grown so much. When we first met 11 years ago, you were so small. Now you've become such a fine young man. I'm sad you're leaving home, but nothing could make me happier. Do your best at university, just like you always do." With a lump in my throat, I said to Mom, "Mom, I'll come back often. When I do, let me eat your cooking. Of course. I'll always make your favorite hamburger steak whenever you want." And so I started living apart from Mom and worked hard at university. During my time there, I was unsure about taking on a new challenge. A job at a big company or as a civil servant would be stable, but I had developed a dream I really wanted to pursue. When I discussed this with Mom during a visit home, she said, "Well, you've got to go for it. Jack, you only live once. You have the ability and talent needed to make your dream come true. Give it a try. I'll always be on your side." Encouraged by those words, I resolved to chase my dream. Looking back, Mom was always my biggest supporter, always believing in me. Her choice to take me in after Dad passed away, dedicating her whole life to me since then, I felt I could never thank her enough. It was because I had a mom like her that I could keep pushing forward with all my might. Time passed, and I became a working adult. Though we live separately, we're close enough to meet, which is why we have these weekly Friday dinners. This is the path Mom and I have walked. It's been 28 years since we first met, and we're still a close parent and child. During our meal, Mom said, "Jack, there's a work-related party coming up." "Oh, really? That's unusual." Mom is currently the head of accounting at a small company. It's the same company she's been with since she was dating Dad. This promotion is likely in recognition of her years of dedicated service. Everyone above department head level is invited. It's a party hosted by our main contractor, and we're allowed to bring family if we're coming alone. "Jack, would you like to come with me? Is it okay for me to go? I want to secretly show you off to my coworkers. To show how well you've turned out." Mom gives me a playful wink as she says this. "If you put it that way, I'd be happy to accompany you." "When is the party?" "Next Sunday." "I'm counting on you." And so I promised to go to the party with Mom, and we each went back to our homes. On the day of the party, I headed to the venue. In front of the venue stood Mom, dressed in an elegant party dress, and a man in a suit. "It's been a while, Mr. Anderson. Is that you, Jack? You've grown into a fine young man." Mr. Anderson is the executive director at Mom's company and her superior. Apparently, he was also Dad's colleague. I've heard he's the one who supported Mom at work when she chose to continue working after Dad passed away. I trust him. "Thank you for looking after my mother." Well, I was worried about her leg." Then Mom said, sounding a bit pouty, "I told you I was fine, Mr. Anderson. You worry too much. I'm sorry. But now that Jack is here, it should be all right." Mr. Anderson and Mom seem to get along well. I've long noticed that Mr. Anderson, who is single, has feelings for Mom. Mom also seems happy when talking about Mr. Anderson, and I think they might have mutual feelings. But things might not be progressing because they're being considerate of me. I've never interfered in their relationship, wanting to respect Mom's decisions. But deep down, I've been hoping things would work out between them. As we entered the party venue, the standing buffet had just begun and was lively. Mr. Anderson offered Mom a chair in a corner of the venue, and she sat down. "I'll go get some drinks," I said. I went to the drinks corner and got white wine for the three of us. While I was at it, I looked around the food area for some light snacks, adding some cheese and olives to the plate. As I was about to return to Mom and Mr. Anderson, I noticed from a distance that someone was standing in front of them. The middle-aged man, wrapped in an expensive-looking suit with a portly figure, suddenly splashed the contents of his champagne glass onto Mom. "What the hell are you doing?" I pushed through the crowd to get to them. Mom was soaked from head to toe, droplets dripping from her bangs. Mr. Anderson, who had been somewhere else, returned and his eyes widened. "Who are you?" the man asked. "I'm this lady's son." "Why on earth would you do something like this?" "Humph. Sitting around lazily at my standing party. She's in the way. I don't care if she says she has a bad leg. Apparently, he's the CEO of the company hosting this party. If I remember correctly, his name is Mr. Johnson." I was about to stand up, but he poured champagne on me before I could. Mom said, looking like she was about to cry. Don't you think this is wrong behavior for a company CEO? I asked. How dare you? Well, commoners like you probably can't afford Dom Perignon anyway. You should be grateful. I poured it on her head. As I glared at Mr. Johnson, laughing heartily, he glared back. What's with that look? You're just some subcontractor's kid. Subcontractors are disposable. Get lost right now. He even made a shooing gesture, as if to chase us away. That's when I lost it. I decided in my heart that I wouldn't forgive Mr. Johnson for pouring champagne on Mom and saying such things. I'll have you fired first. What? Mr. Johnson looked at his entourage, then burst out laughing. You think you can get me fired? Try it if you can, kid. Mr. Johnson looked completely at ease. That's when I silently took out my phone and made a call to someone. Mr. Rivers, it's me. I'm thinking we might have to cancel our deal. Yes. I've had a bit of an incident with your Mr. Johnson. Ah yes, he poured Dom Perignon on my mother and told us to get lost. Then I hung up. Mr. Johnson was staring at me with a dumbfounded expression. Rivers, isn't that the name of our group's chairman? Just then, the phone in Mr. Johnson's chest pocket started ringing. Huh? Mr. Rivers? No way. Mr. Johnson almost dropped his phone, started trembling, and looked at me. What's your name? He asked. I'm Jack Thompson. I'm the CEO of D Corporation. As I said this, Mr. Johnson's jaw dropped and he turned pale. D Corporation? You mean that giant IT company that just agreed to do business with us? Yes, that's right. When I said this, the crowd around us started buzzing. Yes, I'm currently the CEO of a multinational global corporation ranked in the world's top 20. D Corporation grew big in the IT field, and we're now launching smartphones and tablets worldwide. The company we contracted for manufacturing is the one Mr. Johnson leads, which is also Mom's company's main contractor. By the way, this party was to celebrate the contract with my company, D Corporation. Actually, I started my business during college. Mom encouraged me and supported my decision. Turning that support into strength, I kept working hard and gradually grew D Corporation from a small startup into what it is today. Now, D Corporation is a global enterprise. As the CEO, shouldn't you at least remember the face of your big client's CEO? I said to Mr. Johnson as I wiped Mom's wet clothes with a handkerchief. Why would someone like you, the CEO of D Corporation, be in a place like this? I sighed. I just came as my mother's companion today. The mother who works for the subcontractor you said you could blow away. By the way, I decided to do business with your company, thinking it would benefit my mother's company. Her company deals with essential parts for smartphones and tablets. Well, that contract might fall through now. As I spoke calmly, Mr. Johnson visibly trembled. I had no idea. I've been terribly rude to your mother. Please forgive me. But I looked at Mr. Johnson coldly. As you can see, my mother has a bad leg. She can't walk without a cane. So, at a standing party like this, she needs to sit, right? She thoughtfully sat in a corner, but you quickly spotted her and said she was in the way. Isn't that right? Then Mom spoke up. I explained that I'm disabled. But he said, I can't believe a subcontractor would hire such a defective employee. What kind of company hires a woman like this? Hearing this, my blood boiled. Mr. Johnson, you say such things to a disabled person? As a company CEO, no, as a human being, that's the worst thing you could say. I don't want to do business with a company whose CEO has such an attitude. It seems my decision wasn't wrong. Mr. Johnson could only mumble, unable to say anything more. Then Mr. Anderson spoke up. Our company may be small, but we actively hire people with disabilities and support them. In fact, Mrs. Thompson does her job excellently. Even if you're the CEO of our main contractor, we can't overlook such comments directed at our employees as a manager. It must have taken courage to speak up against the main contractor. But I was relieved that Mr. Anderson said this. I'm truly sorry. I deeply regret my actions. Mr. Johnson nodded his head, but I showed my anger as I spoke. Listen, This person you poured champagne on and looked down on is my only family. When my father died, she took me in even though I wasn't her biological son and raised me with all her heart. She's my only mother who has always supported me." Mom's eyes welled up with tears as she whispered, "Jack." I put my arm around Mom's shoulders and glared at Mr. Johnson. "I will never forgive you for insulting my mother like this. You will definitely be held responsible. Anyway, the deal is off." This party was meaningless. Without realizing it, everyone in the venue was now focused on us. The employees of Mr. Johnson's company and CEOs of related companies were also looking our way, pale-faced. "Please don't say that. Forgive me. Our company will suffer great losses if this contract falls through. If that happens, I'll really—" Mr. Johnson cried and fell to his knees. Then he prostrated himself before me. "Shouldn't you apologize to my mother before apologizing to me?" I said coldly. Mr. Johnson then prostrated himself before Mom. "Ma'am, I apologize for my rudeness. Please, can't you persuade your son to reconsider canceling the deal?" Mom responded firmly to Mr. Johnson. "Personally, I find this very regrettable. I have no intention of interfering with my son's decision." "No," I spoke again. "My mother has said this, and I have no intention of changing my mind." Then Mr. Johnson clung to my legs. "Please, Mr. Thompson, anything but that." As I was about to shake him off in annoyance, suddenly, "Stop it, Johnson," a voice echoed from the entrance of the party venue. "Mr. Rivers." It was Chairman Rivers, the head of Mr. Johnson's group, whom I had just spoken to on the phone. Mr. Rivers walked over to us and nodded his head. "Mr. Thompson, I deeply apologize for the great disrespect our group's Johnson has shown to your mother. Mr. Rivers is nearly 80, but as the chairman overseeing a large enterprise, he has a commanding presence. There's no need for you to apologize, Mr. Rivers." As I said this, Mr. Rivers glared at Mr. Johnson. "After discussing with the board of directors, we've decided to dismiss Johnson here." "What?" Ignoring Mr. Johnson's shocked outcry, Mr. Rivers continued, "This man has only been throwing his weight around since becoming CEO, and was disliked by everyone. His dismissal is only natural. We can't ask you to continue the deal. We simply want to apologize for this rudeness." Saying this, Mr. Rivers nodded his head sincerely. I looked at Mr. Johnson and said, "Will Mr. Johnson really be dismissed?" "Yes, I promise," Mr. Rivers replied. Then Mr. Johnson cried out, "Mr. Rivers, I don't want to be fired after I've finally made it to CEO." Silence. "I was wrong to entrust the CEO position to someone like you. Someone like you should disappear from the company right now." Mr. Johnson, who had just told us to disappear, now heard the same words from Mr. Rivers. He hung his head dejectedly and slumped to the floor. "Mr. Rivers, if you'll dismiss Mr. Johnson, we'll continue with the deal. I look forward to working with you in the future. Really, we're deeply grateful. We couldn't ask for anything more." Mr. Rivers grasped my hand and bowed his head repeatedly. Then he looked at Mr. Johnson and shouted, "Now, quickly remove this man." At his words, Mr. Rivers' aides dragged away the shouting Mr. Johnson. Mom and I just watched as this happened. After that, the party resumed under Mr. Rivers' direction. But since Mom was soaked, I decided to take her home for now. As we left the venue, all the party attendees nodded to see us off. I nodded to Mr. Rivers and left with Mom and Mr. Anderson. "Mom, you went through something awful. Are you okay? You're not catching a chill, are you?" When I asked in the car, Mom smiled. "I'm fine, Jack. More importantly, thank you for getting angry on my behalf." It made me feel better. Relieved by her words, Mr. Anderson nodded his head to me. "Jack, I'm sorry. If I hadn't taken my eyes off her, I might have been able to protect your mother." "It's okay, Mr. Anderson. Despite the other party being our main contractor, you got angry and spoke up for Mom. I think that was a courageous act." Mom also thanked Mr. Anderson, but he seemed embarrassed, so I decided to tease him a bit. "By the way, Mr. Anderson, how do you feel about my mom?" "Huh? Well, that's..." Mr. Anderson is nearly 60, but his face turned bright red. "Hey, Jack, Don't say weird things. Mom's face seemed to redden a bit too. I'm quite busy, so I've been thinking it would be nice if there was someone close by to look after Mom. Mr. Anderson, I'll ask again. How do you feel about my mother? Then Mr. Anderson spoke clearly. Actually, for a long time now, I've come to think of Sarah as someone very important to me, Mr. Anderson. But I've watched Sarah work so hard to raise you after losing your father, Jack. I thought if I expressed my feelings, it might surprise and confuse her. I nodded at his words and looked at Mom. You heard him, Mom. How will you respond to Mr. Anderson? Mom looked alternately at me and Mr. Anderson, seeming confused. She didn't seem to know what to say. So I said as gently as possible, Mom, it's okay for you to be happy. Huh? All this time, Mom, you've devoted yourself to me. You tried to be my mother, right? But I'm okay now. It's your turn to be happy. If you like Mr. Anderson, I want you to take his hand honestly. And I want you to be by the side of someone who's important to you. Then Mom said with a trembling voice, I also cherish Mr. Anderson. Mr. Anderson, may I take your hand? Mr. Anderson's face lit up with joy. Of course, he said loudly. I smiled as I watched the two of them join hands. This is what happened afterwards. Mr. Rivers dismissed Mr. Johnson as promised. Mr. Johnson, forced out of the company, became like an empty shell and is now reportedly shut in at home. Apparently, Mr. Johnson, who had been wasteful while enjoying his position as CEO, didn't have much savings. His wife divorced him, his children abandoned him, and he's living alone now. From now on, he'll probably grow old alone, unable to find new employment. But I don't feel any sympathy for him at all. As for me, the smartphones and tablets we launched at D Corporation are selling well, and the company has grown even larger. Now, I'm traveling around the world, fulfilling my duties as CEO. Even though I lead such a busy life, I'm not too worried about Mom. That's because Mr. Anderson is by her side now. They remarried, and Mom has moved into Mr. Anderson's condo, and they're living together. Mr. Anderson is head over heels for Mom, so I can rest easy leaving her to him. While I'm working, I get a call from Mom. Jack, are you doing well? Yeah, I'm fine, Mom. You know, Mr. Anderson and I are planning to go to France for our honeymoon. I'd like to see your company's branch office there. Of course. I'll take you to my favorite restaurants there too. When I said this, Mom laughed happily. I intend to never forget my gratitude towards Mom and to continue living my own life to the fullest.